Hello everyone and welcome back. Today, we're diving into the 12th episode of our story where Iruka bravely steps in and takes Mizuki's shuriken to protect Naruto. Believing Iruka to be dead, Naruto is overwhelmed with grief and anger, ready to unleash the Kyuubi. But just as he's about to tear off the seal, he's stopped by none other than his hero, the Yondaime Hokage. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel after watching the video. Let's get started. Udatain Koharu's world had collapsed. There was no other way to describe the events that were unfolding before her and Hamura. He stood, much as she did, in the stands of the stadium slack-jawed as the violence raged around them. It was fortunate they were old. They were not important enough for the sound, or Suna to target. Not whilst there were active Konoha shinobi to worry about. It was how they had been the only ones to notice as Root had shattered the barrier that trapped Hiruzen, Jiraiya, and the traitor in with each other. At first, their hearts had soared as Danzu's men had cut down the shinobi that had erected the barrier. There may still have been time to save their old friend. Betrayal was the bitterest of pills to swallow, made all the worse by the fact that it was, at least partly, one of her own making. Below them, the chaos shifted, resonating with the events above. Figures all in black weaved through the clamor of battle, unnoticed until their blades met flesh. These new presences were indiscriminate. Konoha shinobi fell, surprised and screaming, as often as their enemies. "He is eliminating his opposition," Hamura said grimly, face hard, and Koharu thought she saw a hint of resignation in his eyes. Now that Danzu has chosen this path, he will not allow any fragment of Hiruzen's way to survive. The price of this coup will be steep, paid for by the blood of our own. Koharu had never been one to wallow in regrets. She had made mistakes aplenty, but she had learned from them and then been sure to keep moving forward. Wallowing would not help Konoha. However, she regretted this. Regretted not seeing the seeds of treason in her old teammate. Regretted her part in those seeds germinating. They hadn't known. But they should have. Shadows coalesced before them into men, blades gleaming in the mid-afternoon light. Neither she nor Hamura moved, even as several more appeared behind them. There was no escape from their fate, both had known at the moment Danzu had driven his sword into Sarutobi's heart. As much as they had agreed with Danzu's criticisms of the third, he knew they would never abide by his betrayal here. Koharu raised her head, held her eyes firmly open in the face of death. Behind her killers, upon the rooftop in the distance, a glimmer of white in the sun caught her eye. A white snake, carefully making its way down from the site of Sarutobi's battle with Orochimaru. Danzu had already turned his attention to the fleeing Jiraiya. Nobody besides her had seen it. Blades fell upon her in a flurry, and Udatain Koharu died knowing that one way or the other, she would be avenged. Jiraiya staggered into the clearing, ragged, gasping breaths shattering the tranquility. If he had the energy, or perhaps if his mind hadn't been a whirlwind of grief and panic and frigid rage, he'd have whistled at the level of destruction that had been wrought here. Sand covered the area. Jiraiya could see it across plants and bushes, caught between leaves and stuck in every possible crevice available to it. Trees had been torn from the ground and tossed wholly across the forest. Fresh pools of water occupied newly made craters scattered irregularly throughout, and in stark contrast, some isolated trees were engulfed in flame, sending plumes of thick, black smoke reaching to the sky. He shifted towards his reason for being here, wincing as his ribs reminded him they were broken. Naruto lay on the floor, having clearly passed out on his feet. His opponent, Gaara, was several feet away, similarly unconscious but covered in his own blood. Even in the dire circumstances, the Sannin couldn't resist a proud grin. The sealing plan had evidently not worked and Naruto had been forced to go toe-to-toe with an out-of-control Jinchuriki. And he had won. At any other time in Konoha's history, Jiraiya would be carrying Naruto back to Konoha and to a hero's welcome. The smile faded. Ignoring the pain, Jiraiya knelt next to his apprentice and checked for any wounds. Remarkably, there were none serious enough to require immediate medical attention. Jiraiya raced through some hand seals and bit his thumb, channeling what little chakra he could afford to into summoning. Kekai, Gamma Hyero. Hyero burst into life next to Naruto, snapping to attention as he realized who had summoned him. The Crimson Toad glanced sideways at Naruto and started, concern flashing across his face. Kami Jiraiya-kun. I'd heard the kid had summoned Bunta-sama for a fight. Jiraiya raised a hand, cutting off the talkative toad before he could build up a head of steam. There's no time, Hyero, we need transport to Mt. Mayaboku. And fast. The toad gave him a once-over and his eyes widened almost imperceptibly when he noticed the state of the Sannin. Say no more, Jiraiya-kun. I'll have you both there in a flash. The toad opened his mouth to begin the jutsu that would transport Jiraiya and Naruto into its stomach, but a weak voice halted them. Wait. Jiraiya turned to the source of the noise, the Suna Jinchuriki, and frowned as the boy began to drag himself to his feet. Gaara, is it? Be very careful. My apprentice here graciously spared your life despite your intention to slaughter his friends and neighbors. I'm in no mood for such mercies. I am beaten, the boy said wearily, exhaustion weighing heavily on his voice. I have no intention of fighting anymore. Then what is it you want? Speak quickly. Jiraiya demanded. The demon, this is the first time in a long time. I can't hear it. There is peace in my mind. He mentioned you were a seal master. Jiraiya felt pride well up inside him so explosively he thought he might burst, and he couldn't resist a glance at his sleeping apprentice. Of course you tried to help him, even while he tried to kill you. Fool boy. He turned his attention back to Gaara. There has been a coup in Konoha. It's no longer safe for Naruto to be here. Get yourself and your siblings away. You'll have to come find us. It won't be easy and I can't make any promises, but I will do what I can to help you with your burden. With that, Jiraiya turned back to Naruto and Hyero began to prepare his jutsu once more. Just as he and Naruto were being drawn into the toad, Jiraiya caught two rasped words from the boy they were leaving behind. Thank you. Asuma darted through the trees, carefully controlling his pace despite the adrenaline and fury flowing through him. Now was not a time for the rash impulsiveness that had dominated his youth. He needed to rein himself in. Life must come before blood. Asuma-sensei, should we really be leaving Sasuke and Kakashi-sensei? They're going back to the village. He turned to glance at Ino, eyes full of fear and confusion, and was filled with empathy for the young girl. She would be a true shinobi with time, but her entire life had collapsed today. It had been battle enough to stop her from heading back to Konoha in search of her mother and father. Kakashi-sensei knows what he's doing, Shikamaru responded, eyes tight and hard. It wouldn't surprise me if he already had a plan, Sasuke too for that matter. Shikamaru is right, he said firmly, and even if Kakashi didn't have a plan, we'd be better off fleeing in different directions and making it harder for a route to track and pursue us. The more groups and directions that we break off into, the wider they have to cast their net. And the bigger the cracks we can slip through are, Shikamaru finished for him. But why are they going through so much effort to find us all? We're only genin. Ino asked, and Asuma realized she was even more stressed than she was letting on. Ino was more than bright enough to connect the dots. Because you are the heirs to Konoha's major clans, Asuma answered. You may not be powerful shinobi in your own right now, but if Danzu can control the clan heirs, he can control the council. Both now, and in the future. No clan head will want to risk their heirs in open defiance. So the more of us escape, the more tenuous Danzu's hold on power will be? Shikamaru asked, and Asuma nodded. Ino was quiet for a moment, before muttering, and that's not even counting how easily someone can be turned if you press the right buttons, turn the right screws. Her voice trailed off, and Asuma knew that she was crying without even having to look. We'll find a way to save him, Ino. I swear we will. Shikamaru's voice was iron hard, but Asuma knew well the fear that it hid. Asuma said nothing in response. He was too old, too steeped in the world of Shinobi. He couldn't make the promises or give the reassurances that Ino and Shikamaru wanted from him. The absence of it reverberated between the three of them like an explosion, and the silence screamed terribly in their ears. They ran. A gentle, rhythmic clacking echoed through the corridor at the top of the Hokage tower. Naturally, his footsteps that should accompany that sound were silent. Danzu enjoyed the sound his cane made. Those who knew him feared it, feared him. Those who didn't underestimated him because of it. He killed those people. "Toryun, what is the status of the hunt for our missing nin?" he asked, voice dangerous, low. "Teams 12 and 14 have been found. The genin have been brought back to the village. Their senseis, regrettably, were killed during the retrieval. Am I to understand then, Toryun, that the search for teams 8 and 10 have been unsuccessful?" he asked, squeezing his cane tightly in his hand, turning his knuckles white. He knew the answer. Had it been otherwise, Toryun would have been tripping over himself to give the good news. "Yes, Danzu-sama. Sarutobi Asuma has managed to kill at least 4 of our trackers and seriously wound 2 others. Team 8's trail has run cold after crossing the border into Kiri, though we found evidence that Team 9's Rock Lee is traveling with them." Danzu nodded slowly. It was good that the boy hadn't disappeared entirely. His showing in the Chunin exams proved his potential. Team 9's situation truly was unfortunate. Might Guy was too enamored with Hiruzen's ways and, like many others loyal to the previous regime, had attempted to fight his way out of the village. His attempt had failed, though he managed to create enough of a commotion that the boy Rock Lee managed to slip through their fingers. Guy would not be turned, and Danzu knew well enough that trying would be a waste of effort, and his attitude had spread to his students. Even so, Danzu had never been one to throw away a potentially valuable tool, and the genin could be turned to his cause, even after the damage Danzu had been forced to inflict upon their sensei. All things said and done, his ascension to power was always going to have been a bloody affair. The losses had been inevitable, a price worth paying. But he needed to act decisively now to secure his position, to secure Konoha's position. Especially as Konoha was missing its Jinchuriki, spirited away as he had been by Jiraiya. The tracking seal he had placed inside the boy using his blade all those months ago was useless while he was with the toads. But Danzu would know as soon as he returned, and the boy would be taught how to properly wield that power of his in Konoha's service. If he didn't, Danzu would simply rip it out of him and give it to someone who could. "Toryun, once the confirmation ceremony is complete, muster the jonin. I have indicated my willingness to Suna to discuss peace terms. We will use this opportunity to wipe the village from the map. You have command of the operation. Kill them all." A moment passed. "Civilians, Danzu-sama?" Danzu's eyes narrowed. "Now is not the time for cowardice and hesitation, Toryun. The other villages will be looking for a chance to strike at us, and we cannot afford to look weak. Scour Sunagakure from the maps, eradicate every man, woman, and child. Show the world what it means to cross Konoha with Shimura Danzu as its Hokage." "Hi, Hokage-sama." Toryun flickered away to begin carrying out his orders, and Danzu paused in front of a set of heavy oaken double doors leading the roof of the tower, where his inauguration as the 5th Hokage was about to take place. "For Konoha." He strode through the door, the red and white robes of office flowing out behind him, and emerged out into silence, suddenly flanked by a pair of ANBU. There were no cheers, only hundreds of kneeling shinobi below. That was fine. He had known that he would never be loved, never be appreciated in the way that Hiruzen had been. But under him, they would be strong. Konoha would thrive. Danzu reached the railing and gazed out upon the village that was finally, his. He smiled. "Civilians and shinobi of Konoha," the masked ANBU to his right called out, "it is my honor to present Konoha's 5th Hokage. Kakashi, we need to move." Hatake Kakashi forced himself not to roll his eyes at Enko's words. He understood the need for speed, for urgency. But understanding didn't stop the bile from rising to the back of his throat, nor did it still his trembling hands. Leading his team into a life-or-death battle he could handle with easy indifference. He was there to protect them. What he was about to do was anathema to everything that he stood for. "She's right, Kakashi-sensei," Sasuke's voice drove the kunai deeper, and he let his lone eye gaze out into the murky forest gloom that surrounded them. They were a good distance north from the village, in a small, secluded clearing in the forest. As careful as they had been not to be followed, there could be no guarantees. They were both right. "You're sure about this, Sasuke? And you, Sakura?" The pair stood across from him, beside a tree. Sasuke's Sharingan gleamed in the dark, tracing subtle flows of chakra in the air in a way that his never could. He looked calm and composed, more certain than Kakashi had ever seen him. Sakura stood beside him, face as serious as it was afraid, and yet she seemed more resolute than even the Uchihas. "It's like you said," she started, "Danzu won't ever trust you. It's only a matter of time before you're taken care of, if you stay." "And the mission?" he asked. "No one would blame you if you wanted to just keep your heads down until something is done about Danzu?" "Screw that," Sasuke spat, with such venom that Kakashi's lone eye widened in surprise. "Those that abandon their comrades are worse than scum. That's the one, ironclad rule you taught us and the rule that Itachi and now Danzu have broken in the worst way possible. We won't stand by and wait while others bring him down for us. I won't be dead weight again." Kakashi sighed. They had grown so much in such a short time. They would have to grow a lot more in the days and months and years ahead of them. In the shinobi world, growing normally meant pain. And now, they would be doing it without him there to help. "Fine. Take as few risks as possible. We have no idea how long you will need to be in place for, and if Danzu suspects any disloyalty he won't hesitate to stamp it out. I'll get in touch with you to arrange how we will transfer information. From this point on, you can only trust each other inside the village, and even then, beware of any deception." "Hi, sensei," they echoed, and Kakashi nodded approvingly. "Hataki, we really need to get moving," Anko ground out, patience wearing thin. He turned back to her and the girl, Kin, that would be their third traveling companion, and nodded. "Be safe, Kakashi-sensei," Sakura half-whispered, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "Protect each other, you too." Sasuke smiled then and looked him dead in the eye. "Don't worry, sensei. I won't allow my comrades to die, I'll protect them with my life." Kakashi's lone eye curved into a smile, but his heart soared as he heard his own words repeated back to him. "Good to hear. Team 7, the true Team 7, you are hereby disbanded until such a time as we can reunite as shinobi of Konoha under their rightful Hokage. Good luck, both of you." Moments passed and suddenly, the clearing was empty, no trace of it ever having been occupied remaining. Naruto gazed out across the seething jungle that belonged to the toads, wrapped heavily in bandages and fists clenched white-knuckle tight. He had won. Saved the village from a murderous Jinchuriki, and yet, it was meaningless. The third was dead, and his killer wore the Hokage's hat. Just the thought of it turned his stomach and set his eyes burning with the beginnings of tears. Behind him, Jiraiya landed softly on the cliff edge that Naruto had perched himself upon. If anything, the old pervert was in a worse state than he was, which still made him real. Jiraiya had always seemed invincible to him. Naruto had never even once gotten close to landing a blow upon his master. Whatever fight Jiraiya and the third had been in on that rooftop must have been unreal. Whatever questions he might have had, he kept them to himself. Jiraiya wouldn't talk about it, and Naruto wouldn't dream of prodding at wounds that raw. "Sensei. Gaki. How are you holding up?" Naruto shrugged his shoulders, "About as well as you'd expect. Physically fine, I guess." "Good. We haven't got time to waste. I've been checking in with a few of my sources. Akatsuki are on the move, which means you need to be ready. Itachi seems to believe they're preparing to move for the Bijou. You have 2 years at most. What about the village? Naruto asked, trying to ignore the flutter of panic that vibrated through him at the thought of being hunted by that group. Don't misunderstand me when I say this, Naruto. I want to wring Danzu's throat more than anybody in the elemental nations, but the damage Akatsuki could do with 9 of the Bijou. This is bigger than just Konoha. Naruto took a deep breath as fear became something else. Resolve. Resolve, and the faintest spark of an idea. Fuck that. Oh? Jiraiya asked, eyebrow raised. You say I've got 2 years? Fine. I'll become so damned strong in 2 years that I'll be able to stop Akatsuki and take the village back from Danzu. Konoha is our home. I won't stand by and let it suffer no matter what. And what makes you think you can get that strong in just 2 years, Gaki? Jiraiya asked. His tone was disbelieving, yet Naruto felt that there was something else there, or perhaps it was the absence of something. It didn't matter. Naruto clenched his fist and looked his master dead in the eyes. Because I won't be alone, I have a plan. Jiraiya smirked, his first smile since they had arrived here. A plan? Now, this I have to hear. Naruto began to speak, and when his idea wasn't immediately shot down by his master, he felt a tingle of excitement rush across his skin. He spoke, and Jiraiya made adjustments as he did so, and the tingle grew into a rush of adrenaline as the enormity of what he wanted to achieve set in. His village had been taken from him. His home, and the home of everybody he cared about. He was going to take it back for them, even if it killed him. The sun rose over the border of Mizu no Kuni much the same as it had upon the jungles of Mayaboku for the past 2 years. Of course, here there were no flies to contend with, and the sticky humidity was blissfully absent, but it was much the same experience at its core. The first tickle of warmth kissed his back, fighting away the night's cold, and Naruto could sense almost immediately the change in the world around him. With the sun's warmth, came life bursting out of every pore of the forest he was meditating within. Every creature for miles reacted to the return of the light, from the birds in the trees, dipping and diving between the branches and undergrowth for the day's first meal, all the way down the tiniest of insects, scuttling amongst the decaying foliage on the floor. A single square inch could contain more life than the whole elemental nations had people, and if he concentrated, he could sense each and every one. It was more than meager awareness, he could feel their life force, connect with it in a way that was beyond his capability to describe. Stretching out his awareness as far as he could was humbling. Millions of lives, each full of passion and energy and determination to survive, and he was but one of them. Little more than a grain of sand on a beach, just trying not to be washed away with the tide. Of course, if he chose to, he could change that. 2 years of training had allowed him to tap into the natural energy around them and mingle it with his own, augmenting the chakra he possessed naturally with the natural energy of the surrounding creatures. The process was dangerous, and even after 2 years of work, he could only focus the tiniest amount of the energy, Sage Chakra, and use it safely. But even that was enough to increase his strength dramatically, enough that Jiraiya had even confirmed he could fight on a level with some Jonin, if only for a short time. Suddenly, Naruto twitched, breaking his near-perfect stillness. As though merely speaking the man's name was enough to summon him, the older man had left their camp, and was ambling easily towards the clearing Naruto had chosen for his morning meditation. Naruto bit back a wave of sour irritation and tried to refocus, but he couldn't find the same level of calm as he had achieved before. With a frustrated click of his teeth, he hopped to his feet and stretched deeply, trying to shake off the stiffness in his muscles as his master approached. What will it be today? Training or target? Minutes passed until Jiraiya finally strode into the clearing, his face so hard it could have been carved from stone. It was an expression that had become all too commonplace since Danzu's coup. Naruto never thought he would miss his teacher's exuberance, but now when it appeared, it only did so as a paper-thin veneer. A mask so brittle that when Jiraiya wore it, Naruto thought he could see the cracks appearing on its surface. Target it is. Sensei. Naruto said, unable to keep a hint of shortness from his voice. "Brat." Jiraiya replied. "The toads have sent word, the hit is happening today. It's time to move." Naruto swore quietly and hopped to his feet, heart rate already climbing at the thought of moving into water country proper. Before anything else though, Naruto sent a ripple of chakra pulsing across his skin, the smallest he could manage with the enormous reserves he had at his disposal, to feel for the seals holding the vast majority of his ninja equipment tattooed, invisible until activated, upon his skin. As usual, he was well prepared for pretty much anything. Without a fixed home to return to, he and Jiraiya needed to be prepared to fight for their lives at pretty much any time. Even Mayaboku itself wasn't entirely safe, and over the 2 years that had passed since leaving the village, he and the toads had fought off several missing nin hired to capture or kill him and Jiraiya, from both Akatsuki and Danzu. "Do we know how turbulent things are along our route?" he asked his sensei, whose frown deepened at the question. "Not as well as I would like. Kirinin from both sides of the civil war are on high alert for outside threats since we leaked them information about Akatsuki's plans for the Sanbai. We're probably heading into a fairly volatile situation, so prepare yourself." Naruto nodded, but winced internally. The war in Mizu after the death of the fourth Mizukage had begun explosively, with the two sides fighting several brutal pitched battles where hundreds had died. However, as either camp entrenched themselves into defensive positions, the nature of the conflict shifted. Mizu Shinobi specialized in stealth and assassination, and soon, most offensives launched by both sides were under the cover of thick, chakra-laden mists that would cover a defensive position. Then, blades and assassination jutsu would flash forth from the gray at opportune moments, stealing the life of their victim and disappearing back into the mist as quickly as they had appeared. Men and women died in their sleep, poisoned or throats cut as they tried to catch a few desperate hours of rest. By all accounts that had reached their ears, conditions on the front lines, whilst physically acceptable, were exacting a hard toll on the psyche of the shinobi stationed there. Strange shinobi would not be welcomed by anybody, least of all foreign missing ninja. "I'm ready, sensei." Jiraiya glanced him over before turning towards the trees. "Follow me closely, there's no guarantee this isn't a trap." They took to the trees, cold air whipping past Naruto's cheeks. It had been a while since they had moved so openly, and for a moment, Naruto had to strain to keep the deep red blur that was his sensei within his sights. He soon found his rhythm, however, and began matching Jiraiya stride for stride, their sandals barely kissing the pinewood tree branches before a chakra-fueled leap took them to the next. Naruto allowed himself a moment to enjoy the feeling of moving freely, of action, his heart soaring as he breathed in the crisp morning air through his nose. Of course, the familiar nerves and tension of leaving on a mission lingered at the back of his mind, and despite the surging joy that had brought a wide grin to his face, his eyes still scanned their surrounding intently, looking for even the slightest hint of danger. Even knowing that they were walking into an active war zone could not dampen that joy, though. It felt so damn good to be doing something, anything, once again. "Do we know we're up against?" Naruto called out to Jiraiya as he pulled level with the older man. Jiraiya shook his head. "My informant tells me it's not one of the main group, but given the target, I wouldn't be surprised if we're walking into an S-class clusterfuck. If one of them do show up, get away," Naruto groused, eyes rolling before he could stop them. "I know, sensei. Though at this point I don't see why I should run away and leaving you to fight two fully fledged Akatsuki by yourself. I'm strong enough to help." Jiraiya snapped to a halt so fast Naruto nearly leaped right past him, and rounded on Naruto with such intensity that though his sensei was about to hit him. Instead, Jiraiya's hands grabbed his shoulders and shoved him back against the tree they had stopped upon. "Kami Naruto, it's not about how strong you are." Jiraiya was half yelling, and Naruto's protests died on his tongue as he caught a peculiar intensity in his master's eyes, an edge he'd never seen before. "We're long past doubting your strength. Even I have to admit your progress is incredible. Then why don't you trust me to help more? I'm not asking you to let me be reckless, I know how important it is to keep the Nine Tails away from the Akatsuki. But I can use it to help stop them. If not, what else is it for? Trust, Jiraiya began, but hesitated, and his grip on Naruto's shoulders loosened. Naruto, if I were to have to fight Danzu tomorrow, there isn't a single shinobi I'd trust more than you to have my back, save perhaps Kakashi or Tsunade, if I could convince her. It isn't a question of trust, or your strength. Then what is it a question of, sensei? We have been training, hidden for 2 years, breaking ourselves, myself, all to be kept hidden away on the mountain, doing nothing while a usurper, a traitor, wears the old man's hat. You keep telling me we can't move against Danzu because the Akatsuki are more important a threat now they are on the move, but outside of a few minor missions like this one, you've not let me do anything to stop them either. Naruto took a few heavy breaths and fixed his sensei with the steeliest glare he could manage. You say that you trust me, that you believe I've become strong, but your actions say something else entirely. For just a moment, his master's shoulders sagged, but it was such a subtle movement Naruto thought he might have imagined it. Jiraiya stepped away, turning back towards the trees laying between them and their target. Enough of this, brat, we've wasted too much time already. When you agreed to become my apprentice, you agreed to accept my judgment regarding your training and how quickly it progresses, and gave up any right to question it. Naruto scowled, frustration bubbling up inside, but he quashed it. His master was right, after all. He had made that agreement all those years ago, albeit without truly knowing what he was agreeing to. The master-slash-apprentice relationship was hugely different from that of a Jonin sensei and their genin squad. It was a close, personal bond. A Jonin and their genin were commander and subordinate first and foremost, though the training of genin was a main responsibility of their Jonin sensei. An apprenticeship was the same way, but the relationship between the two was far closer, more like family than comrades, with its own set of rules and expectations. Naruto had no right to question Jiraiya's decisions, at least while he was apprenticed to him. Suddenly, Jiraiya turned back, the hardness gone from his eyes. But when this is done, Naruto, we will talk. Properly. You may not have the right to answers, but you sure as hell deserve them. Naruto's mouth hung open as his prior frustration bled away. Answers. Perhaps even a chance to convince Jiraiya to make even a small move against Danzu. Even the hint of an opportunity to start wresting control of Konoha from that bastard was enough to set his heart thundering in his chest with excitement. He kept his smile small, and his nod respectful as he followed Jiraiya into the trees. Thank you, sensei. The last 2 years had felt like an eternity, watching helpless as Danzu solidified his grip upon Konoha and Hai no Kuni as a whole. But perhaps, finally, it was time for them to fight back. So, Naruto called out over the rush of wind past his ears. Who's the target? Jiraiya glanced back, eyes hard. Akatsuki hit squad. Here to take out a Kiri arms dealer with a price on his head in a few other countries. Kiri can't publicly show support to a criminal with their own shinobi, no matter how much they buy from them, so they've hired us under the table to protect him. Naruto frowned. Akatsuki have hit squads? Outside of the most notorious figures, Jiraiya had been frustratingly tight-lipped about the inner workings of the organization set on capturing him. He knew of the shinobi at the top. Of those, Jiraiya had given him a frightening amount. The 9 focal members have been doing what they can, but the scale of what the Akatsuki intend to do needs greater numbers. They've been employing a huge number of missing nin to collect on lesser bounties and to serve as foot soldiers. But, the more they rely on these, the more weaknesses there are in their security. We aren't here to just stop the assassination, our own personal mission is to take the hit squad captive and interrogate. Naruto nodded, his own face hard, matching his sensei's. This was a part of Jiraiya's role as Konoha's spymaster, at least it had been. Information in the shinobi world was not easily given up, and was the most crucial weapon in their arsenal. That didn't change how much his sensei hated what he had to do, no matter his experience in the matter. The man's short temper, even compared to usual since Konoha had fallen, suddenly made an awful lot of sense. They came to a halt on the edges of a clearing nearly an hour later, just as dusk was beginning to take hold, obscuring vision even further than the thin curtain of ever-present Mizu no Kuni mist had earlier on. In the murk, Naruto could make out the dancing flames of a campfire, and the coppery tang of blood in the air. Too late. They didn't need to get any closer to know that, but Jiraiya signaled for Naruto to follow him into the clearing regardless. Their real target, after all, could still be close, or even still there, if they were feeling especially overconfident. He suppressed his own chakra, not an easy feat given how much of it he could bring to bear now, and followed Jiraiya into the clearing following their usual procedure. Immediately his eyes widened, as their target stopped suppressing their own chakra, or, in fact, chakras, and a dense wave of power and killing intent washed over the clearing that 2 years ago would have buckled his knees. Instead, he was able to dodge the chakra-laced spear that lanced at him out of the mist, neatly sidestepping the attack as it shot into the ground beside him. Itachi-san, are you sure we can't kill this one? The voice seemed to come from every direction, ringing out around the trees surrounding them, though it seemed to come from a male on the younger side. I would advise against it, Deidara. That is the Jinchuriki of the Kyubi no Kitsune, Uzumaki Naruto. Itachi emerged from the mist before them without warning, swathed in the distinctive black and red cloak of the Akatsuki, crimson eyes spinning. Unlike the last time they'd met, the cloak was already unbuttoned, ready to allow Itachi full freedom of movement, as though fully prepared for full-scale battle against Jiraiya and his apprentice. Naruto, though, knew better, and the bubble of anxiety at potentially facing a pair of S-rank shinobi lessened. Itachi was, and had always been, loyal to Konoha, and was Jiraiya's main contact within Akatsuki. Ah, for shame, that gormless expression would have made for a spectacular central element within my next glorious artwork. No matter. His legs will do instead, he doesn't need those, does he, Itachi? Itachi shrugged nonchalantly. It would save us a chase when we eventually come to claim him. How right you are. The man, Deidara, laughed wildly, stepping out of the mist himself. He wore a cloak that matched Itachi's, with a mess of long blonde hair that covered his eyes, and a larger-than-usual shinobi tool pouch at his hip. Naruto chewed the inside of his cheek as he pondered what he knew of the man. Deidara was S-ranked like Itachi, but was not quite on the same level as the Uchiha. A famed IWA terrorist that had disappeared nearly 5 years ago after wreaking havoc across multiple countries before re-emerging as one of Akatsuki's 9. He formed a hand seal, and grinned wildly at the former Leaf Shinobi before him. What a privileged position you're in, to witness my art at its most magnificent. Now, please try and live. It would be a pain to explain that we have to wait another 4 years for your beast to reform, Katsu. Naruto grimaced as he watched his clone remember too late, just as he had, that Deidara's specialty was explosive ninjutsu. The strange white spear the man had hurled fizzed and glowed brilliant white before suddenly exploding violently, sending earth and chunks of splintered tree away in every direction. Deidara cackled with his eyes wide and manic, stretching out his arms wide before him. Magnificent. Tainted only by a poor subject. And a good thing, too, Itachi said, a hint of rebuke tinting his tone. Unless you desired the task of explaining to our leader why he must delay our plans to allow the Kyubi to reform following its host's death at your hands, Deidara? The man's face twisted petulantly beneath his scratched-out IWA headband, and he muttered and swore harshly under his breath. Naruto was struck by the familiarity of the conversation. It was exactly how he and Sasuke had interacted before he had graduated. Before Mizuki. It told him a lot, all in a few short seconds, about the organization he was being hunted by. They were all S-ranked shinobi, sure. But there were levels within even at that dizzying height. Unhinged though he appeared, Deidara knew well and good that he could not win a fight against Uchiha Itachi. The question was, where did these two rank amongst the rest of the Akatsuki? How high did the levels go, how powerful would he have to become to match them? To survive? If you would but submit, it would be trivial, boy. Naruto rolled his eyes at the deep rumble that reverberated around his mind. Quiet, you. If I wanted sweet nothings whispered into my ear from someone whose breath smelt like cat piss, I'd ask Jiraiya to hook me up at one of his establishments. The fox chuckled, and his presence faded once again to the back of Naruto's mind, but the damage had already been done. He attempted to concentrate his entire attention at the shinobi below, only to realize the Uchiha's eyes were already locked directly upon his own. "Why don't you come on down, Naruto-san," he said placidly. "You are not our target here, today." His heart raced, and he glanced towards Jiraiya, who nodded in assent. Swallowing, he tried to leap down beside his sensei. Only, when he did, he jumped only into a vast, black abyss of nothing. He floated there in void for seconds, or perhaps hours, before he felt ground beneath his feet. Blood-red something seeped down from the edges of wherever he was like ooze, forming a crimson horizon lit by a pale full moon. Genjutsu. It was impossible for this to be anything else, but no matter how Naruto pulsed or manipulated his chakra as Jiraiya had taught, it would not so much as waver. "My genjutsu are not so easily broken, Naruto-san," came Itachi's voice from behind. "I have to wonder, is this really all Yondaime-sama's son has to offer after 2 years?" He spun to face the voice, on to be met by a flurry of crows flying in every direction and fading into nothing. "Your chakra tells me you are far more powerful than you were, at least in body. But your eyes tell me how much weaker you've become in spirit. Is Danza's little insurrection really all takes to break the spirit of Uzumaki Naruto, the man who would become Hokage?" "My spirit isn't broken, asshole," he bit back, but there was a hesitation there, one he hadn't anticipated before he'd spoken. This time the crows gathered in front of him, and formed into the shadow of Itachi himself. "Jiraiya is not the only one who watches, Naruto-san. Not the only one who plans for the future. Things are worse than even he believes." Itachi faded, and the whole world spun and dissolved, and when it reformed, Naruto sailed above tree tops like an eagle, watching events pass below. Leaf-bearing, black-clad shinobi swept across the elemental nations on strings, killing and being killed in return, bathing the lands in Sharingan red. At the end of the strings, Danzu, lone-eye wide with hunger as he surveyed his conquest. "He will not stop," Itachi's voice came again, solemn. "Not until every head is bowed in subservience to him, or else removed from the shoulders that once bore them." But it is not only him. They flew even further, until he saw another puppet master and his strings. This figure was bathed in shadow, his eyes equally hungry as 8 titanic beasts raged across the earth below, devastating everything in their path. Screams and demonic howls echoed all around, penetrating right to Naruto's very core. Between the rampaging creatures, 9 black and red cloaked figures raced, dealing nearly as much death as the tailed beasts. Both forces once believed they were doing what they did for good. For the benefit of the world, and for the benefit of the people. For peace. But for both, the pursuit of power and the price of attaining it, has warped their perception of the world beyond reckoning. See it now, the price of their peace, laid bare. Another shift. This time, a face. She was a genin, by the look of it. Young. Brown hair and honey-tinted eyes. Naruto watched as her kind smile was split by the kunai of an older man wearing the leaf. Naruto was still screaming as another scene solidified him again. He watched as an older man, another shinobi, left his family on a mission with his team, only to be rent asunder by tainted demon chakra an hour later. Another shift. Young male, long, jet-black hair. Crushed between 2 earth ninjutsu. His skull split from the pressure, brain matter flecking the jagged rocks and, shift. "Please, no." Naruto murmured, as an older medical ninja was stabbed through the heart as her genin patient bled out on the muddy floor. "No." Shift. A small hamlet, overrun by deserters, every man, woman and child slaughtered to cover their passage. Shift. Woman. Jonin. Throat cut whilst buying time for her genin team to escape. Shift. Child, starved to death. Shift. Man, drowned in a water jutsu. Shift. Child. Shift. 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 Face after face, each wearing blank eyes contorted and twisted in fear and pain. Naruto sunk to his knees, tears streaming down his face, unable to close his eyes to the horror. Please stop this, Itachi. Please. No. You must understand the path the shinobi world treads. What is at stake? What Danzu has wrought in Konoha, even what he has done in Suna since, it pales in comparison to what comes if he, and the Akatsuki are not stopped. I understand. You do not. If you did, you would have done more than simply ready yourself for your own fights to come. What happened to the principles that defined who you were when last we met? The will of fire that drove you to stand between Konoha and Suna's own Jinchuriki? Naruto ground his teeth, as the torrent of faces continued to flash by in front of him, lacerated or burned or tortured, and Itachi's disembodied voice span around him, everywhere and nowhere. It burns as strong as ever. It's why I've trained so hard, so I can put a stop to all of them and take the village back for everyone. There was a sudden flash, and everything stopped. He felt cool air touch his skin, and the gentle rustle of leaves on the breeze that carried it. Above, the sky smoldered a gentle amber, familiar and soothing. He knew without looking anywhere else this sky belonged to Konoha. His legs hung over a small jetty across a lake, swinging as though a child, and beside him, Itachi clad in gray civilian clothes sat cross-legged, gazing pensively across the lake. With a start, Naruto realized he knew this place. He would walk by this place on the way home from the academy, and sometimes, he would see Sasuke practicing his fire jutsu out across the water. How he regretted, even now, not going to speak to him back then. Of making time for a person just as lonely as he had been. If that is so, Naruto-san, why is it you've abandoned everyone who once fought with you? Even as we speak, your friends and comrades are being hunted just as you are, and they have no sannin for protection. And yet, you have done nothing to help. Hundreds who were unable to escape the village still remain entrapped by a tyrant, people you swore to protect. What would you have had me do, Itachi? Root has hounded us every step of the way, and Akatsuki outclassed me by leagues. Jiraiya said we had to run, so I did. Said we had to hide, so I did. He said he was keeping ears close to the ground for signs of everyone, and that we should hold fire until I was strong enough to fight, so I did. He sunk his head into his hands, rubbing fiercely at his eyes. Do you really think I don't want to see everyone again? To be able to help them? Itachi turned to him then, dark eyes lacking any malice without the presence of the Sharingan. I do not mean to needlessly torture you, Naruto-san, or paint what you have done as a failure. Your actions so far have been entirely understandable. Then why? Because we all have a role to play, and yours, whether you are ready for it or not, lies at the center of it all. As the host of the Kyuubi, as Jiraiya-sama's pupil and as the son of Yondaime-sama. As Uzumaki Naruto. You are a linchpin for the future. I do not need the Sharingan to see how events fold themselves around you, how they will fold themselves around you. Yet, no matter how strong you become, you cannot do this alone. No training can give you what you need for victory, and the time you have left to prepare dwindles faster than even Jiraiya-sama believes. No game is won with just one piece, and as it stands, yours are scattered to the winds. Do you really believe yourself and Jiraiya alone will be enough when Akatsuki comes calling? Or when Danzu brings his full force to bear? Naruto shook his head slowly, and Itachi inclined his head in assent. The boy who dreamed of becoming Hokage, it is no longer enough to dream, Naruto-san. You must become the man, else the dream will die with you. The scenery flickered again, and Naruto found himself standing once more beneath a crimson, moonlit sky, facing Itachi decked out in his Akatsuki robes. This time, Jiraiya stood to Naruto's left, face hard as stone. "Wah!" he slurred, before his knees gave out beneath him and he slunk to the floor, the world spinning beneath him. "Apologies," Itachi said, voice level. "I am not well practiced in bringing more than one person here at a time. Welcome to my Tsukiyomi. Here, time passes at a vastly reduced rate, and we can speak away from Deidara's notice. We must be quick, however. Even if I mean no harm, extended time within this jutsu can be taxing on your real body and mind." Tsuchi-kin wiped her damp forehead with the hem of a gray sleeve, slightly coarse from the wear and tear of time and labor. The location they had chosen for the orphanage stood high on a cliffside plateau, the walls of which rose up beyond ground level. It crafted a neat basin, invisible from the ground, filled with its own small forest and wells of spring water rising from beneath. It was the perfect place to disappear, and the perfect place to help others disappear, too. Quick footsteps drew her eyes up from the loose earth holding well-grown potato plants. They belonged to a small, honey-eyed girl wearing a simple navy cotton dress, with a beaming smile and a basket full of berries and nuts. "Inori-chan," Kin said, smiling back. "Emi-sama." Inori cried Kin's pseudonym happily as she came close, and held up the basket for Kin to inspect. "Look! Me and Daiki-kun gathered lots today." Kin stood, leaning to the side to crack her back, before reaching out and tussling the girl's mess of brunette hair. The movement uncovered the small, ivory-white horn protruding from the girl's skull for only a moment, but it was enough to send a flush of white-hot fury rushing through her. She forced the smile to stay on her face, and gave the girl's head a gentle pat. "Great work, Inori-chan. Why don't you take them into the kitchen and get your hands washed so we can start to prepare food?" Inori's face twisted as though she'd swallowed something particularly bitter. "Do I have to, Emi-sama?" Kin raised an eyebrow. Outright refusal was unlike her. "You don't have to, but it's not like you to not want to help." "I don't mind helping." The girl insisted loudly, before putting her hands behind her back and kicking idly at the dirt with her head down. "It's just she's back. And she smells funny. Again." Kin blinked, brain slow to kick into gear as she processed what the girl had said. "She's back. Anko." Her feet were moving before her mind caught up, immediately into a mad dash across their slapdash little farmland area, and past a half-dozen waving and giggling children. Ahead, stood their pride and joy. A log cabin buried between the trees, 2 stories high and large enough to hold dozens more children comfortably than they already did, with a broad thatched roof and gray stone chimney that was already billowing smoke for their return. On the doorstep, Daiki leant on the door frame with folded arms, and a deep scowl writ large across his scar-lined face. At 13, he was the oldest of those they'd taken in, and had appointed himself as something of Kin's second-in-command, and the designated protector of the other children. "She's inside," he huffed, obviously annoyed, but keeping a lid on his temper so as not to offend Kin. "I don't understand why we have to put up with her. All she does is eat too much of our food and frighten the others." Kin sighed. "I understand your frustrations, Daiki-kun, but she's stronger than any of us. Besides, she's the best warning we'll get if he's not really dead." Daiki flinched, but made a visible attempt to suppress his discomfort. "Her word is the only thing that says he isn't, and I can't for the life of me see why you would trust that. She's probably only saying that to freeload from us." Kin's smile grew wry. "We're all victims of him, one way or the other, her included. You don't have to trust her though, you just have to trust me." "Do you trust me, Daiki-kun?" The younger boy flushed and looked away, but managed to mumble an "obviously." "Good man, now why don't you round up the others and get them ready for bed? It'll be dark soon, and we don't want anybody outside when that sun sets." "Of course, Emi-san." Daiki nodded and set off at a jog, leaving Kin to attempt to rub some of the tiredness from her eyes before heading inside. The hallway was dimly lit, but sure enough, Kin's nose caught the stench of stale alcohol, and followed into the study, where Anko was slumped across a pallet in the far corner of the room, opposite Kin's own desk. "You know, you could make even the slightest hint of effort with the children," she called out. Anko twitched, her eyes never opening, yet a kunai lanced out from her direction at impressive speed. Fortunately, Kin was already shifting her head to the side as she spoke, anticipating the older woman's opening gambit. "Fuck she slurred, voice half muffled by the blankets she was face down in, and Kin rolled her eyes. "I take it you've had no luck?" Kin asked softly. Anko rolled over, revealing a face utterly devoid of emotion. Not a sign of any of them. Not Jiraiya, nor Tsunade. Couldn't find any evidence the bastard himself was active again either. Kin worried her lip before saying hesitantly, "It has been over 2 years, Anko-sensei. Are you positive he is alive? I can feel it. That creepy fucker is just biding his time until he can do the most damage again. He'll rear his ugly head again, and when he does, we will kill him. For everything he's done, to all of us." Anko glanced back at her, and nodded. Kin smiled and began to turn, but Anko's voice stopped her right on the threshold of the room. "Thank you, Kin. I know I'm not the easiest to deal with lot of baggage. I can be a real bitch, especially to the kids, you're a touch on the rude side, but I've never seen you be cruel with any of them. A touch terrifying, but never mean. If you ever gave them a chance and let them past your walls, you'd see they all get it. I mean, how could they not? They've all got the same baggage we do." "I know that, I do," Anko said finally. "I just can't. Not again. I already did that with everyone back at the village, then had to watch it all go up in flames." "I know, Anko-sensei. It's okay. The kids are my responsibility, not yours. All I need from you is to help me get strong enough to keep protecting them until they're able to leave and do that for themselves." Anko grinned for the first time. "And so we can finally kill that snake-faced fucker for good." "Of course." But, as she walked away to begin to prepare food for the children they'd spent the previous 2 years rescuing from Orochimaru's now abandoned labs, Kin couldn't help but shake the vision of vivid blonde hair and reliable smile that had changed her entire world. The children weren't the only reason she wanted to get strong. Tsuchi-kin owed a debt, and she always paid what she owed. Humans teemed between ramshackle wooden market stalls like ants, industriously scurrying to and fro in desperate search for food to bring home to their respective colonies. Aburame Shino had never understood the collective human fear and disgust for insects. Logically he understood it as a genetic holdover from a time where an unfortunate encounter with the wrong creature would be enough to end a life. The illogical side of him, his emotions, simply couldn't understand how others couldn't see what he did. They were so alike to humans in their nature that it was almost impossible for Shino to separate them. His colony was as much a part of him as any of his family or friends. It was impossible for him to know that many individuals personally, of course, but he could feel each of them. Feel how they were all unique, with their own personalities and quirks. Shino threaded his way through the crowd, moving in the same half-harried way of the rest of them. He was the best of them for this, besides Kurenai-sensei, of course. Hinata was too timid, and these days radiated far too much sadness. She drew attention, sympathy, and gave it too freely to match. Kiba, on the other hand, shone with anger, even 2 years on. He walked with too much swagger, and glared challenges out at anybody who might dare to take him up. He did not blame his teammates for their failings. They were quite understandable. 2 weeks after their escape from the village, news had reached them of the Hyuga's demise. The main branch had been cleansed, root and stem, destroyed for their unbreakable loyalty to the Sandaime. As far as they knew, the branch family remained, as sealed and imprisoned as they had been before, only with a new master holding their leash. Shino thought about Hinata's difficult relationship with her infant sister and father, and the clan elders for a moment, and gave thanks that she had not actually been there to see it for herself. That would have been a blow from which she may have never recovered. Just losing them seemed to have brought her close enough to that point already. Kiba had not been so fortunate. Team 8 had been visiting the Inuzuka compound in the aftermath of Danzu's coup, deciding on a course of action when they had come. The Inuzuka were too loyal. Unlike the Hyuga, Danzu did not even bother to offer them a place in his new Konoha. Root came in force, and Team 8 had joined the defense of the clan compound, nailing their colors to the mast in the process. His teammate had seen each of his nearest and dearest pulled down one by one, the Inuzuka imprint driving him into a bloodier and bloodier fury with each cut-down member of his pack. The imprint was a peculiar clan quirk that few knew about, a pheromonal marking where an Inuzuka will create an unbreakable bond of loyalty with those that share it. The clan head, Tsum, imprinted upon the sitting Hokage by tradition, a promise of unflinching loyalty to the death. Danzu's betrayal meant she would find it impossible to curb her need to avenge her pack mate, and so she had to die. The rest of the clan, who shared the same bond with her, had to be dealt with the same. For a short, horrifying moment, Shino had been forced to try and come to terms with the thought of leaving Kiba to die with his clan, his imprint making it all but impossible to drag him away from their murderers. It was his sister Hana that saved them. A twist of genetics, her own bond had failed to set in as a child, meant that as torn by grief as she was, she maintained enough of herself that she could help drag her brother away from the fight. Shino nodded his thanks as a too-thin stall owner handed him a too-small selection of supplies, and he melted back into the crowd, just another face among the swarm of regular townspeople and recently arrived refugees. A small ripple of chakra on his hand drew his attention, one of his scouting Kikai had returned, and Shino's back straightened as the danger pheromone it was leaking found him. Enemies. 2, if he was reading the trail correctly. But there was something else mixed in, a warning apart from the simple presence of enemies. He pulled his collar high and followed the movement of the throngs, allowing himself to be carried along towards the source of the danger. A few moments brought some more scouts from his colony, and their own individual interpretations of the enemy. Pair. Came through a lot. Male. A rough approximation of height and build. A mixture of Chunin and Jonin level chakra reserves between the two, though the insects transmitted this as a size of meal. It was the last, slightly fraught message, however, that sent ice lancing through his veins. Hive. 1. Immediately, Shino issued the command to recall his entire colony, and set to scanning the crowds desperately, heartbeat in his throat. The message ruled out other missing nin looking for a bounty, or kami forbid one of the Akatsuki Kurenai grew increasingly paranoid about. No, the warning of Hive all but guaranteed Konoha nin. Danzu's men, and one of them possessed a Kikai colony of their very own. Finally, Shino laid eyes on the pair. It could have been nobody else, even disguised in civilian garb and lounging easily on the chairs of a sake stand as they were. Aburame Tombo was a Jonin-level member of the Aburame, and had been well respected even before the coup. Shino had liked him very much, he had more of a sense of humor than most Aburame were inclined towards, and he had often taken time out of his day to mentor and support the training of the younger Aburame. Shino was careful not to stare. Tombo would recognize him just as easily as Shino had him, and it was incredibly likely that he had been sent with teammates' recovery specifically in mind. The other, the Chunin-level man, had dark, chestnut hair and suspiciously pale eyes, though he wore contacts in an attempt to disguise the thankfully inactive Byakugan. His jaw worked anxiously beneath his collar, as the colony within him stirred in anticipation of a fight. He quieted them, mindful of the ability of skilled Aburame to sense the unease of nearby colonies, and strode past the pair with as much nonchalance as he could muster. The others must be warned. It was a shame, Shino had enjoyed his time as part of this ramshackle little community. That said, he'd felt much the same about the dozen they'd fled from before they'd arrived here. Shadows warped around him, wrapping him in comfortable invisibility. He was no stranger to the dark, as a shinobi it was perhaps one's greatest ally. However, in recent years, he'd tried his utmost to step back into the light, no matter how it burned. For burn, it surely did. Oh, he hid it with an easy smile and eccentric habits, but every second he spent apart from the shadows was an exercise in resilience. His comrades had helped a great deal, shielding him from the worst, and forgiving his peculiarities. Despite it all, stepping out of the shadows, shouldering the pain rather than fleeing from it, had been the hardest thing he had ever done. He inched forward, every movement lithe and graceful, his silence a dagger keener than any he could have held. His targets lay below, utterly unaware. They kept the standard Umbu watch pattern. 2 figures bearing the plain masks of the Root Division patrolled the perimeter of their encampment, whilst 2 slept. 2 more remained out of view, sharing the darkness with him, albeit unknowingly. It was a difficult to maintain watch schedule, with sleep deprivation being all but guaranteed throughout the unit. It was a deficiency their master expected them to be able to overcome with no loss in performance. Shinobi were to him, after all, tools rather than humans. These men in particular had been in the field for nearly a month, and the strain had long since taken its toll. Even if they had been tools once, these were men. Exhausted, hungry and struggling beneath the strain of their false Hokage's impossible expectations and the stress of being constantly under threat by their enemies. Danzu's actions after the coup had continued to be unforgivable. The Suna massacre had resulted in mass militarization of the entire elemental nations. Each waited with bated breath to find out if they were to be the next target of Danzu's thirst for power, and each plotted and planned their own potential strikes and alliances for the day war began. The world lay upon a bed of gunpowder, and all knew it would only take a single spark to set everything alight once again. He stepped from the shadows, blade gleaming, and the first of the hidden entries fell with his hand silencing the pained gasp. Blue eyes met cold gray, and he watched life disappear from them as he had 1,000 times before. It had been scary at first, how easily he had fallen back into old habits. How quickly he had fallen back to taking life without a moment's hesitation. H.I.S.E. would have been disappointed, had he been alive to see it. The Sandaime would be even more so. He after all, had been the one to put so much effort into bringing him back into the light. The next man died just as quickly, his leaf headband catching the firelight for the barest moment before the body was laid carefully beneath the forest underbrush. Death was as natural to him as breathing, and he hated himself for it, even as he pulled the headband from his covered eye, and the world exploded into color, and he saw the vivid chakra flows of the last 4 targets shining out ahead of him. Kakashi had tried for months to locate Jiraiya and Naruto, for that was surely where the fight to take back their village would begin, but it was no use. He had guessed they were hiding in the summon realm of the Toads, most likely training Naruto and gathering information. He'd then hunted down some of his old comrades, familiar faces to keep him from the dark. Enko was nowhere to be found, she and the Sound Girl had seemingly vanished without a trace since that night in the forest. Kakashi thought that a good thing. Neither, for that matter, was Might Guy. This was less reassuring. Kakashi was yet to find evidence that Guy had even escaped Konoha, nor any trace of his presence from his sources within. Kurenai had been easier to pick up the trail on, but only long after she had moved on. The entirety of teammates seemed to be roving far and wide, hiding out and evading Konoha pursuers to the best of their abilities whilst scraping an admittedly miserable living. Asuma, on the other hand, had been the easiest to find. He and Team 10 seemed to be operating openly as freelance shinobi, taking on contracts at a steady rate. That, Kakashi could only assume, had been a decision made in anger. The death of the Sandaime had hit every loyal Konoha shinobi hard, but for Asuma, the loss of his father was incredibly personal. They had never fully recovered their old relationship, and now they never would. Operating so openly could only be a direct challenge to Danzu and his Root agents. He peered back at the Root right in front of him, still painfully ignorant of their fates. Kakashi understood Asuma's anger, his own had fueled his path since the coup. Unable to find Jiraiya, Kakashi could easily have joined either squad. Helped them. Remained in the light. In the end, he had chosen the darkness. One day soon, a battle would be fought, those loyal to the will of fire, against those not, and Kakashi was certain in his heart that Uzumaki Naruto would be leading the charge. Kakashi had chosen the darkness, as he was sure that the most help he could be to the cause was to ensure there were as few standing against them as possible when the day came. After all, like his father before him, Hatake Kakashi had always been a true shinobi. A deadly weapon, a dealer in death. And deal he would, until he could bring the light back to his comrades and restore that home, no matter how far into the darkness he himself had to fall. His targets took their last breath with the terrible tune of the Chidori ringing through their ears. Naruto blinked as what Itachi had done became clear. A double-layered illusion woven between he and Jiraiya, where they had both been trapped, but Naruto had experienced a whole other reality within the briefest of seconds. He glanced to his side, where Jiraiya glanced to and fro, examining his surroundings with a frown. Even for you, Itachi, this jutsu is impressive. I do not think I could have escaped this had I not known you were an ally. I've never experienced anything quite like it. I appreciate your saying so, Jiraiya-sama. Tsukiyomi is an ability unique to my own Mangekyo evolution. Jiraiya nodded, pursing his lips. What do you have for me, Itachi? 2 things. Firstly, and most importantly, our battle begins in earnest now. This will likely be the last time we can exchange information so freely. Naruto's mouth fell open, Itachi's previous words ringing in his ears. You mean, yes, Itachi regarded him solemnly. The Akatsuki have all their pieces in place for whatever final goal is being aimed towards. Orders have been issued to several of the inner circle to make their move on their main targets. The hunt for the Jinchuriki has begun. Blood thundered in Naruto's ears, the weight of what he was being told landing like a physical blow. He'd known for a long time this was coming, of course. He'd prepared as much as he could over the last 2 years to be ready for this precise thing. Panic shot through him like lightning regardless. There was only so much you could do to stop it when being told 9 shinobi of Uchiha Itachi's caliber were beginning their hunt for you. Who are the targets? Jiraiya asked, all business. It seems the hunt must happen in tail order. A team have been dispatched to capture Sabaka no Gara and Yujito ni. I do not know who of our number, only that it is not our leader and his partner, nor Kisame or myself. Jiraiya nodded. All things considered, that's probably as reassuring as things could possibly get. There are good options and bad ones still, but from what I can see, the worst is off the table. What else did you have? We were followed here by a Konoha hunter squad. For Jonin-level root members. One has the chakra of somebody I would be required to engage carefully. Deidara is under the impression we have willfully led you here as a trap. We are to retreat upon the arrival of the interlopers and report your abilities as they currently stand to the rest of the organization. It is regrettably sound as a plan. Jiraiya shrugged. Thanks for the heads up, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. What I can do is already pretty widely known, and much of how Naruto fights could be pieced together through accounts from those that survived spectating the Chunin exams and what I'm most likely to have taught. Either way, we'll have to flex a little muscle to leave unharmed, so there's no point in grousing about it. You've done well, Itachi. There was a pregnant pause as Itachi stood firm in the face of what Jiraiya seemed to believe constituted a plain dismissal. Something else? Itachi was silent for a moment, and suddenly his eyes closed in an expression of resignation. Nothing, Jiraiya-sama. I am merely reaching the limits of how long I can maintain this jutsu and the time manipulation within. How long will it have passed for Deidara? Jiraiya asked. Not even a second has passed in the real world. Naruto couldn't help but whistle appreciatively as the black and red world of the Tsukiyomi fell away, revealing the same clearing they had been in before, complete with a smirking Deidara and the ever-serene Itachi. Well, Deidara said suddenly, breaking the silence. As fun as this has been, I think it's time we left you to our other guests as we have places to be. He saw Jiraiya tense and begin moving moments before he felt the reason why. The Tsukiyomi had shook the nature chakra he'd been passively channeling to sense his surroundings from his system. Now he was standing still, however, he'd begun to channel it once more almost by instinct, and felt just how close the quartet of presences Itachi had warned of were. Jiraiya leapt back as one masked figure exploded from the ground beneath him, and two more immediately pounced, driving him away from Naruto. Their plan clear, Naruto threw one last glance at the retreating shapes of Itachi and Deidara before concentrating fully on his attempts to find his opponent. His heart raced, and a small grin broke out on his face. 2 years of low-risk missions and training. Of preparing. Of being held back. 2 years of being constantly aware of a threat he could do nothing about. And, finally, there was something real in front of him. Something he needed more than he could possibly describe. Something he could hit as hard as he could. A glimmer of light upon liquid gave his assailant away. Sneaky bastard had been slowly weaving trails of black liquid across the floor to him for Kami knew how long. He rejected Jiraiya's approach of retreat, neatly flashing through a series of hand seals and loosing a stream of white-hot fire from his mouth to incinerate the liquid. The flames lit the clearing, revealing a trio of black shapes above him, eagles mid-dive. Naruto twitched a finger and a kunai materialized from one the many-minute black seals on his hand. He deftly weaved between the strange airborne creatures, his kunai carving a path through them like wind, the last just barely avoiding his strike. Naruto's grin grew as the subtle pop of a jutsu release sounded behind him, his opponent finally committing to the fight proper. Naruto span on instinct, left hand shooting upwards to redirect a savage kick aimed to his throat. The shinobi opposite him launched into a flurry of well-drilled attacks, all picture-perfect and lighting fast, and all aimed for places that would cause the greatest possible damage. He matched each blow at a speed that surprised even himself. It was easy to forget after spending so much time with him, that Jiraiya was one of the strongest shinobi alive today. Compared with him, his opponent moved to Naruto's eyes as though he were underwater, sluggish and obvious. If it wasn't for how hard Naruto had to strain himself to keep up, he would have supposed this man was a chunin. Naruto deflected an obvious left jab, only for his opponent's movements to change. One moment he was there, and in another, he was gone, twisting through Naruto's guard with a fluid, almost serpentine movement. Naruto tried to angle an elbow strike toward him, but the root agent evaded it deftly, brushing against Naruto's kunai pouch to avoid it, before scampering away and out of the reach of Naruto's following kick. He narrowed his eyes, as the opponent wheeled around to face him, plain white root mask hiding a mess of jet black hair. He was fast, and skilled. He'd shown just enough to make Naruto think he'd gotten his measure, before sharply increasing his speed to catch him off guard. Clever, but executed too slowly to have caught Naruto. It was odd, Itachi had been confident about declaring these all Jonin-level shinobi, yet his opponent attempted to capitalize on his distraction, throwing several shuriken to set Naruto off balance, before launching himself at the blonde at almost imperceptible speed. Almost. Naruto stepped into the strike, redirecting it with his right arm and sending the root nin into the path of a freshly created Kage Bunshin, who launched a savage kick right through the man's solar plexus. Naruto only raised an eyebrow as the figure exploded into a shower of that oily black liquid, before turning slightly to face the real root nin, standing just out of the way of the battle. The masked shinobi tilted his head almost innocently, as Naruto narrowed his eyes and his Kage Bunshin popped from existence. In the background, the sounds of Jiraiya's battle raged, though from the panicked communication of the normally silent root behind them, it was clear the direction that battle was taking. "You know," Naruto said nonchalantly, "if you really wanted to take on me and Jiraiya, you should have bought a battalion, never mind a single squad. This was suicide." To his surprise the ninja chuckled. It was the laugh of a man younger than Naruto expected, yet utterly devoid of joy. Devoid of anything, really. "You are correct, Naruto-san. We stood little to no chance of victory, and knew so when choosing our fate. Jiraiya-sama alone all but guaranteed that, but you have grown beyond even Danzu-sama's predictions. He truly thought I would be a match for you. Ah well, orders are orders. He crouched slightly, pulling a scroll from a pouch at his hip and loosing the parchment and a brush. Naruto felt the surge of chakra as it flashed across the paper, and a trio of brilliant white, drawn lions roared forth from its pages. Recognition hit him like a hammer, but there was no time to talk. In seconds the lions were upon him, teeth bared. In response, lightning crackled forth from his palms, two luminescent blue and white whips that crackled and fizzed through the air. He deftly twisted his wrists, and the whips lashed out, carving apart the ink-drawn apparitions, which were quickly replaced by other. For a moment, Naruto danced with the creations, his whips providing a perfect cymbal crash accent as they rent apart several of the chakra ink creations. Chakra surged once more, and behind them all, something far larger emerged. An ink gorilla at least twice his height howled and beat its chest before barreling towards him, the ink lions fanning out to surround him as it did so. Naruto scowled, the knowledge of who was behind the mask and the uneasy feeling he'd gotten from the few times he'd actually met his attacker. More than anything else, though, what drove his next move was knowing just how close this person had been to Danzu. The thought of the man sent fury burning through him, hot and hateful, and he felt the satisfaction of the Kyubi no Kitsune. That didn't matter to him in this moment, he only saw the enemy, and the means with which he would drive them into the ground. He only had to loosen the tight rein he kept on himself the barest of amounts, and even that sent a flood of bubbling, demonic chapter coursing through him. He felt the searing as it bubbled up over his skin, burning and yet not. He felt his canines extending, his features stretching and sharpening, and the claws extending from where his nails once were. The gorilla was almost upon him, murder in its eyes, until suddenly, Naruto was simply not there at all. The creature blinked, confusion painting its face right up until Naruto's fist penetrated where its heart would normally be. It fell away into inky nothing, and Naruto darted away, fueled by the nine-tailed fox's hateful chakra. He could feel his opponent straining to keep up with how quickly Naruto was destroying his creations, but it was a futile effort. Within moments they had been culled enough that the path to the culprit was clear. Naruto's eyes sharpened, his heart stopping dead as he darted forward. The haymaker Naruto landed was enough to shatter the mask and send his enemy sprawling across the dirt, and all the remaining ink drawings splashed to the floor as the Kyubi's chakra bled away from him, allowing him to start taking in nature energy once more. "I see yours if finished too, well done Naruto," came Jiraiya's voice from behind. Naruto looked back at his unscathed master, who was walking away from a body on the floor, with a summoned toad stuffing another into his mouth not far away. "Only two?" Naruto asked. "The squad was led by Fu, one of Danzu's best," Jiraiya said, shrugging. "I killed one, and took the other alive." Fu wisely decided retreat was in his best interest. "Seems a waste." "Perhaps. Danzu obviously believes taking back the Kyubi's power is worth expending whatever resources it might take." "No matter the potential of those resources," Jiraiya said, and both of the former Konoha shinobi turned their gaze towards the unmasked and unconscious Shimura Sai. "I did request that you bring no strangers to our realm when I agreed to allow you to hide here, Jiraiya. But I suppose circumstances necessitate me to be flexible," Fukasaku said, voice low and disapproving, though whether that was aimed at he and Jiraiya, or the bound figure at their feet, Naruto couldn't quite tell. Either way, Jiraiya dipped his head in acceptance of the chastisement. "I can only apologize, Fukasaku-sama. The situation, oh, please, Gaki. Don't you, situation, us," Fukasaku's wife, Shima snorted. "You and I both know that if things were so dire you weren't able to summon us to ask permission, you would have required the use of sage mode. You simply knew we would have told you no had you asked first." Fukasaku and Shima glared in the silence that fell after. The two were the great sage toads, the leaders of their clan of summons, and in the humid jungles of empty Mayaboku, their word was law. Naruto kept his face schooled in one of deference. He'd come to greatly respect both of the two toads in his time here. Despite barely reaching his knees in height, the two elder toads were fearsome fighters and masters of sage mode, and they had taken him under their wing since Konoha's fall. Jiraiya, on the other hand, couldn't help the smirk that bloomed on his face. Well, I wasn't wrong now, was I? We needed to secure him for interrogation, and MT Mayaboku is as secure as it gets. We're not putting your lands in danger, this one's just a tadpole. Fukasaku shook his head ruefully. Even a tadpole will consume its brothers and sisters in the spawning pool, especially when desperate. And this is one of Danzu's. There's not a harmless one among them. Naruto looked down, and the impassive gray of Shimura Sai's eyes met his own. He had to resist the urge to shiver. Even bound, outnumbered and outclassed, his expression was one of consummate, effortless calm. Every glance was one that was weighing his opponents and surroundings, analyzing and probing for weaknesses. The boy had given him the creeps when he'd first joined Team 7, and 2.5 years of life under Danzu's rule had not eased the feeling. I will take full responsibility should things go wrong, Fukasaku-sama, Jiraiya said, his voice unusually earnest. Fukasaku regarded him for a moment, before finally inclining his head, and Jiraiya turned to Sai. Now then, Root Brat, why don't you tell me why you allowed yourself to be captured? What does Danzu want? Naruto blinked, but was distracted from the small, unsettling smile that bloomed on Sai's face. Good, the boy said, almost happily. I am glad I do not have to waste valuable time convincing you of that. You let yourself be beaten? Naruto asked quickly, unable to help himself. Not exactly, Sai said, turning that unnerving smile upon Naruto. I am not at a level required to best you in combat. My orders were of a different nature. I simply leveraged what I know of you as a person, that you would not respond with lethal force if I did not provoke you with it, to ensure I would be taken alive, rather than killed. And those orders are? Jiraiya probed. Sai simply smiled and stuck out his tongue. Check it, Naruto. Naruto nodded at his sensei's request and knelt down before the captive shinobi to examine the strange black markings upon his tongue. 3 solid lines, and 2 broken. A hexagrammic sealing jutsu that all the root shinobi they'd taken alive had upon them. Zeka Kenzetsu no In, cursed tongue eradication, Naruto said. Just like all the others. Sai shrugged. Naturally. It will prevent me from actually telling you any of my orders, or divulging any useful information about Hokage-sama or his plans. I may have to aid your cause. Then why even come at all? Naruto asked, frowning. Just because I can't be direct, does not mean I cannot set you along the path. In truth, I have come to say 2 things. Firstly, Uchiha Sasuke and Haruno Sakura send their regards, and wish for me to tell you both that they remain loyal to the true Konoha. Kakashi-sensei is rarely able to arrange a circumstance where we can pass on intel. The chance to bring their willingness to do so to perhaps the most infamous spymaster of this era was too good to pass up. I have upon my person several storage seals in which I allow my teammates to store whatever they deem necessary. Who can say what they have placed within? Naruto's lips quirked into a smile. Clever. You know, Sai, I never knew what to make of you when I first met you. But from this conversation, I think I like you. I didn't know you were gay, Naruto-san, Sai said, face unblinking. I regret to inform you that I don't swing that way. Naruto felt warmth flood his face and his jaw drop, whilst Jiraiya howled with laughter, and Naruto, after a moment, joined him. 2 years ago, he might have been outraged at the suggestion, but now he recognized the intent behind the joke, or at least Sai's reason for making it. An ill-judged, pale imitation of comradely banter was as close as Sai could get to an offer of friendship after everything Root had done to him. When things calmed, Jiraiya knelt down to Sai's level and helped him up against a tree, so he could sit more comfortably. Have you told us everything you're able? Sai's blank expression fell into an unconvincing frown. I believe so. The seal is thorough. I do have a question for Naruto, however. Naruto's head tilted, and he nodded for Sai to continue. Having been en route for such a long time, I am privy to a lot of information that others aren't. Such as your encounter with Hokage-sama while on a mission 2 years ago. Naruto instinctively clutched at where the older man had stabbed him back then, a wound now fully healed by the Kyuubi's chakra. What of it? I just wondered how well it had healed. It seemed so unlike Danzo-sama to do pointless things. Sabaka no Gaara had rarely noticed the heat of the desert in his time living in Sunagakure. A lifetime of acclimatization, the Ichibi and near-constant insomnia had seen to that. It was odd then, that he should miss it so now. He found it ever more peculiar, the longer he had been away from home, just how much he missed the place that had essentially doomed him to a life of abject misery and isolation. But he did. He missed the pale yellow stone of the buildings, and the way them sand-laden breeze whispered through empty alleys, and how when he sat beside his window and listened to the children playing, he could imagine that he had been one of them once. He missed the days when all of those things were not tainted in his mind with the smell of ash and burned flesh. Missed being able to picture the sands not clogged crimson, or the streets not littered with bodies. More than anything, he missed the feeling of walking just about anywhere in the village flanked by each of his siblings. He hadn't recognized their love, hadn't appreciated it. Now it was too late. Rain beat against the thin dome of sand trickling from his gourd, even as thick mists swirled around him, making vision all but futile. This was fine. His concentration lay on the fine dusting of sand that lay in a several 100-meter circle around their camp. He could feel the vibrations of everything that touched them. Each fallen branch and every animal's footfall, no matter how slight. Every enemy, too. Any that tried to come close would find the earth beneath this entire thicket-lined forest clearing had been ground down to fine particles, and added to his arsenal. This was his domain, and nothing would set foot here without his permission, without discovering just why Sabaka no Gaara was so feared. Today, at least, there was no threat. Gaara did not exactly relax, he never did, but he did allow his attentions to shift from the perimeter to their encampment. Dozens of tents, tattered and hastily assembled, stood erected beside waterlogged fires. The land of lightning's climate had not been kind to them, but their hunters were loath to cross the border, and they had been given little choice. Danzu's hunters had been relentless in their attempts to wipe his people from existence. As he slowly walked into camp, the silence struck him, just as it always did. These people would have never been this silent at home: talk, bickering, laughter, weeping. All the sounds that humans made, that he had once found so detestable, he now longed to hear again. But just as Konoha's vicious retaliation had changed him, it too had changed what was left of Sunagakure's populace, perhaps irreversibly. Gaara-sama? A half-whispered, timid voice called. The source was a small mouse-haired genin, who spoke to him with head bowed. There is no presence I can feel, Matsuri. Signal the others they're welcome to continue their work. She breathed a sigh of relief and nodded, before bringing her hands to her mouth, and whistling out a bird call. It would be a lie to say the camp burst into life. Slowly, tentatively, what was left of Sunagakure crawled out of tents, and began to shuffle around after their menial tasks. In the same way, Shinobi crawled out of hiding spaces prepared for ambushes. Of these last remnants, only the Shinobi met his eyes, offering respectful, borderline reverent nods and salutes as they went on their way. That had been one of the other changes since the massacre. People looked at him differently now. During the retreat, it had been Gaara that had held the line, aided by a surprisingly willing Shikaku. He'd been able to fully transform and control his demon's power, and leveraged it against the Konoha Shinobi with savage efficiency. Even now, he couldn't pinpoint why he'd done it. He'd certainly never felt any love or affection for his people, but something had changed in him. Gaara hadn't been able to watch his countrymen slaughtered in their own home, not without a fight. And so he'd fought. Fought like the demon they'd all accused him of being. He'd killed and torn and crushed until he was certain there were no more to be saved. It was only after that he realized he'd done so without feeling any of the joy he used to feel when killing. Instead, it had come in weeks and months after. Having led what few, broken remnants he could clear of danger, he'd taken them on the run, holding back with what few shinobi that could still fight, all of the forces Konoha's murderous new Hokage could send. Before long, the fear in the eyes of Suna's people that had so long haunted him had disappeared, replaced by an entirely new emotion that made him feel dizzy when he thought about it. Respect. Acknowledgement. Gratitude. Slowly but surely, they found the bravery to approach him in their downtime. Only ever quiet words. Brief. Cautious. Thank you for saving my son. You are the only reason my family made it out. My sister is alive because of you. I'm sorry. He treasured every syllable. What do you think it is that you sense? Came Matsuri's voice again. She was still stood beside him, now following his gaze, trying to see whatever she thought he could see out in the mist. I'm likely just being overcautious, Gaara said, the lie slipping easily from his lips. No reason to cause a panic. They were all scared enough as it was. Have you seen my sister? Hunting the last I heard. Would you like me to find her for you? Please. Mitsuri inclined her head and scurried off to find Temari. Gaara sighed. They would not, he suspected, have made it far without Mitsuri's ability to organize and corral people on Gaara's behalf, as well as support him with managing their confusing emotional needs. She was only a chunin, but had already proved herself to be crucial to what was left of their village. She was prone to panic, though. Gaara supposed she lacked the assured calm that only came with experience. Therefore, Gaara couldn't afford to let her or the civilians hear what he was now certain of, not until it was absolutely necessary. They were being hunted. Your orders. Sasuke glanced down at the sealed scroll being held towards him in gloved hands. The cover of his mask was especially useful in these situations, where it allowed him to surreptitiously scan things for threats with his Sharingan. Seeing nothing, he took the orders and stored them on a small seal on his palm. Hokage-sama requests that I remind you that your orders are for your eyes only, not those of your team unless they specify otherwise. Sasuke narrowed his eyes at the masked shinobi, allowing the words to hang in the air and the tension to climb. But it was a pointless endeavor. The other shinobi simply stared back, impassive and unreactive, like every other one of Danzu's root lapdogs. It made Sasuke's blood boil. Being careful not to let that fact slip, he nodded, turned on his heel and set off across the village's rooftops. The pale glow of star and moonlight smothered everything below in a veil of silver, and cool breeze whipped past his skin as chakra-supplemented leaps carried him across the village at a pace he would have found exhausting 2 years ago. He thought about the past often. No longer just days when the Uchiha clan still stood strong and proud, but now of the time before Danzu. A time where the streets below, even at this time, would have been bustling with activity instead of graveyard silent. A time where people went about their daily lives with smiles on their face, talking to their neighbors and helping each other. A time where Sasuke could move from one side of the village to another without feeling the eyes of masked men tracking him every step of the way, ready to kill at a moment's notice. Of course, 2 years ago, he'd never noticed exactly what Konohagakure was to those that lived there. He'd never appreciated what they'd had, even before his clan had been brutally murdered by his own brother. As with many of the good things in Sasuke's life, he'd never appreciated it until it had been stolen from him. It had not taken many instances of people being dragged off of the streets in the middle of their days for people to spend as much time as possible in their homes or places of work. Nor had it taken many cases of doors being kicked in and folks dragged out of beds for the villagers to work out the consequences of an overheard comment about their venerable Hokage. Danzu would say that crime rates had plummeted, and productivity had increased tenfold. That their shinobi had increased their mission completion ratio to levels unheard of before his coup. He would also say they were safer than ever, with their dangerous neighbor Sunagakure scoured from the map, and their mission load added to our own. Technically, none of those things were untrue. But neither was the fact that people were fleeing at a steady rate, regardless of how many arrests Dazu made, or how many traitors were executed for being caught. Nor was the increased fatality rate on missions as exhausted shinobi were pushed well past their limits, or that with Suna destroyed, the other villages had accelerated their militarization and begun seeking alliances to stand against Konoha. For every step Danzo took to grow his and Konoha's power, another crack appeared on its surface, held from breaking by fear of the man who stood at the helm. Sasuke only hoped it shattered before Danzo plunged them all headlong into a war unlike any seen before. He arrived at his deserted clan compound even more tense than when he'd last left it, and his pace didn't relent until he arrived at his family home, slid the front door aside and stepped inside. He only felt the eyes of his observer leave his back when he closed the door behind him, and was finally able to let out a deep sigh, allowing the tension to bleed out of him. He took the mask from his face, sealing it away, before rubbing tiredly at eyes now returned to black. "Any word on Sai, Sasuke-kun?" "No," Sasuke said, as softly as he could manage, before raising his eyes to meet the concerned gaze of Sakura. "But he's more than capable of looking after himself. I'm sure he's fine." "Of course you're right, Sasuke-kun," Sakura said, in an almost too sweet voice. She stood half covered by shadow, her face bearing none of the joy or naivety held in her voice. She had her arms loosely crossed over the top of a sleeveless black undershirt. Arm-length fingerless gloves stopped close to her bicep, leaving her crimson ANBU tattoo that matched his own visible. By her waist, her left hand ran through a sequence of hand signs, a code that the pair created in order to communicate safely. "Danzo sent him after Naruto and Jiraiya-sama, how can you say that with any certainty? I certainly wouldn't be hesitating to kill anybody in a root mask if I was them. They haven't been so far, given how many have been sent after them and not made it back. I have orders from Hokage-sama. I will let you know if you're needed. Neither is the sort to kill without reason. Besides, Naruto knows Sai, even if not very well. They have likely taken him prisoner, which is probably the best-case scenario." Sakura nodded in understanding. "I'll go and prepare my equipment just in case. Sorry, I can't help but worry. I don't know what I'd do if I lost either of you, too." "You won't. I promise." Sakura shot him a tremulous smile before leaving towards their supply room, and Sasuke allowed himself another sigh. That he was reduced to not even being able to speak freely within his own home used to infuriate him. Now he was just tired. Their mission was too important to compromise, and Sakura's family situation made scrutiny on the pair of them even more intense than it would have been otherwise. Your father leading a civilian revolt tended to have that effect. Proceeding to his father's office, a neatly organized room with a small, plain desk and chair, Sasuke used a lick of Katan chakra to light the candles, and another to melt the wax seal on his latest orders beneath the flickering firelight. It took him a moment to decipher the code, even knowing the cipher as well as he did, but as full understanding of what he was being asked to do filled him, he felt a glimmer of excitement and hope fill him for the very first time in 2 years. "Uchiha Sasuke, Tonkubetsu Jonin Mission Rank, S orders, you are to hereby bring the traitor Hatake Kakashi to justice, by any means necessary. Alive preferable, but not required. Urgent priority, retrieval of target's stolen Sharingan I to take precedence over every other concern, including capture of target. Your team will leave at dawn. A chance to be out of the village. To see Kakashi, and exchange intelligence. Perhaps, even, the chance to test his growth in the 2 years since the coup." His eyes brushed over the team that would be sent with him, and the smirk that had blossomed on his face fell away, and the small taste of hope and joy he'd first felt turned to ashes in his mouth. Shikamaru wiped a week's worth of sweat and grime from his eyes and squinted, fighting to keep the blazing sun from obscuring his vision too much. It had been nearly a fortnight since they'd accepted this most recent contract, a fairly tedious track and capture on some no-name Suna shinobi that had pissed off Iwa's daimyo. Well, former Suna shinobi, at any rate. But what his own former village had done here 2 years ago was a can of worms far too troublesome to be opening here and now. Of course, this whole affair was more troublesome than he really wanted to think about. When Asuma had first suggested bounty hunting, Shikamaru had been the one to persuade the others to throw themselves into it. It seemed the best way to keep moving, to ensure they were getting stronger. Ready. After all, there was no way of knowing at what point the call would come. That Naruto was finally ready to make his move to take Konoha back, because there was no doubt he would do just that. He wasn't the kind of guy that could just take what Danzu had done lying down. No, he was out there getting himself ready for a fight. Training with Jiraiya until he was strong enough to lead the way. When that time came, Shikamaru had every intention of being there to fight with him. So he and the rest of Team 10 had gone into hiding. First with the Ninja Guardians, Asuma's old crew had harbored them, even trained them a little, until the daimyo officially recognized Danzu as Hokage. Once that happened, they were officially traitors and missing Nin, and the Guardians would have been obligated to attempt to capture them. Asuma had proposed bounty hunting as a way of staying on the move and getting stronger at the same time. It seemed logical, and the four of them had still been so angry, it hadn't taken much persuasion to get Ino and Chuji on board. Beside him, Ino shifted. This is taking longer than it should have. No Chunin is catching Asuma-sensei off guard. Just stick to the plan. And if he isn't alone? Then great. We'll be able to take out more of his network in one fell swoop. If Asuma runs into trouble, it'll be loud enough that we'll hear. Ino sighed, but Shikamaru felt her nod, regardless. How much longer do you think we'll be doing this, Shika? It's been 2 years, and Asuma is just as angry as he was then. We're stuck not moving and I don't like it. Me either, but what else can we do? Asuma won't stop, not anymore. And even if I felt comfortable leaving him in this state, which I don't, we've nowhere and no one else to go to. We need his training if we're going to be ready. Chuji scoffed from his other side, and Shikamaru had to bite back a response far harsher than his best friend deserved. Unless you have another suggestion in mind, Chuji? He shrugged. I just can't believe someone is still holding on to this fantasy of Naruto coming back and taking back the village. He's gone and so is it, Shika. Even if he does come back, what exactly is he going to do? Naruto's a great guy, but he would need an entire army to even start taking back the village. I say we stop waiting and start building our new lives as far away from Danzu as possible. Shikamaru pinched the bridge of his nose, but said nothing. A year ago, and it had been easy to argue patience and training. But it had been 2 years since the invasion. 2 years with no word from any of their former comrades besides the hunter Nin Danzu sent after them. 2 years since he'd heard anything at all from Naruto. Chuji hadn't seen what he'd seen in Naruto, though. His terrifying growth since graduating, his iron-wrought willpower. He hadn't felt what it was like, standing beside him against the odds. Shikamaru had. He knew, illogical as it was, that Naruto was returning. That he would fight to take back the village. And he knew, as insane as it sounded, that he would win. All they had to do was wait and prepare. Ino had built the beginnings of a connection with Naruto. She had seen or felt something in his mind and emotions that even she had trouble describing. That, together with her faith in Shikamaru's judgment and Asuma's strength, was keeping her going. Chuji, for all his fortitude and kindness, didn't have the same bedrock of belief to cling to. At first he'd been happy to take it on faith. But after 2 years of being hunted and hunting others, of blood and dirt and sleepless, frantic nights, he was quickly running out of faith. Shikamaru didn't blame him, how could he? They needed something to hold on to, and they needed it soon. The sound of crickets filled the empty Mayaboku air with a loud hum, punctuated only by the snap and crackle of their fire as Naruto and Jiraiya relaxed beside it after their evening meal. They had gotten into plenty of scrapes in the 2 years since they'd left the village, but today was probably the most intense he'd had in that time. Itachi's warning had set his mind alight, and Sai had only added fuel to the fire with his cryptic words and implied disloyalty to Danzu. Either way, find him out. Akatsuki were finally on the move, for the Jinchuriki was like being thrown headfirst into an ice bath. As much as Jiraiya had made the group his priority, Naruto's focus had remained well and truly upon Konoha and becoming strong enough to reclaim it from Danzu. Outside of brief interactions with Itachi and Kisame, he'd never actually come across the Akatsuki in any meaningful way besides being told they would one day target him. It made it easy to put that threat to the back of his mind, and allow himself to believe Itachi and Kisame were outliers in terms of strength. However, encountering Deidara had been a sobering wake-up call. His nature energy manipulation allowed him to get a good idea of another person's strength without ever having to actually fight them. Everything he'd read from the bingo book reports told him that Deidara was most likely the weakest of the Central Nine, if that idea actually meant anything when it came to monsters like them. However, having felt his power, Naruto genuinely wasn't sure whether he could escape, let alone win. Even after everything, he still wasn't ready to fight these guys on a one-to-one basis and win, and they tended to move in pairs. Itachi was right. He needed more. Needed to be more. He'd been so willing to put the entire burden of taking back the village for everyone and defeating Akatsuki on his own shoulders, that he'd only focused on himself. On getting stronger. But this wasn't a battle he'd ever win alone. Not against Danzu, and not against the Akatsuki. The position of Hokage didn't exist for him until Danzu was defeated, but he couldn't afford to wait until then to be ready for it. It was no longer enough to dream about being Hokage, even if he couldn't claim the hat, it was time to become a man worthy of wearing it. "I can see you prepping your little speech, Gaki," Jiraiya said, voice cutting through the silence and Naruto's thoughts. "Save it. At least until I've said my piece." Naruto's eyes widened as he remembered Jiraiya's promise, before all the insanity of today had even started. Seeing he was listening, his sensei pressed on, voice somber. "I suppose first of all, I owe you an apology," Jiraiya said, raising a hand to cut off the objection already forming on Naruto's tongue. "In the time I've known you, you've shown every quality I'd expect from a shinobi set to reach the very pinnacle. You're whip-smart, tenacious, and your dedication to improving yourself, even having lost your home is, quite frankly, terrifying." Naruto couldn't help the warm flush of heat that rushed his cheeks at Jiraiya's words. He'd never heard Jiraiya be so effusive in his praise of him. Kami, he'd never heard anyone be so complimentary about him before. This wasn't how he expected this conversation to go at all. He saw Jiraiya notice his embarrassment, and was put even further off kilter when his sensei turned his nose up at the opportunity to crack a joke at his expense. "You've been the model pupil from day one, and even now, with all your frustrations, grief and anger, you've still done everything I've asked of you, despite me being less than patient with you when you've asked for my reasoning. It's not as if you haven't had a lot on your plate between training me, Akatsuki and everything with Danzu. I'm a real pain in the ass, and that's before you even get started with the other two." Jiraiya shook his head, and to Naruto's dismay, his attempt at lightening the mood fell flat. "The truth is, kid. You've earned the right to answers 1,000 times over. The right to know what our plan is, to be involved in it, and treated like the shinobi you've grown into." Naruto smiled wanly. "I can understand the reluctance though, Jiraiya-sensei. Even now I'm not the most patient, but back when you met me, I was reckless, and too headstrong for my own good. As much as I hate to say it, but I'd be hesitant to tell me about it, too. But I'm not that person anymore. I understand taking back our home won't happen overnight. I get why Akatsuki needs to be as much of a priority. Doing nothing isn't an option for me anymore, they're coming whether I'm ready or not." Jiraiya rubbed his eyes, and under the firelight Naruto could suddenly see every hard-lived year in the deep lines on the man's face. "That's just it, Gaki. There is no plan. No great scheme to bring down Danzu, or keep you safe from the Akatsuki and put an end to their plans. Not in a million years could I have predicted Konoha falling. With the whole weight of the village behind us, we had time to gather our strength, for you to keep training and getting experience. Now, though, I had hoped after 2 years I'd have the answers, or found some kind of weakness to exploit. Jiraiya sagged. I've failed. I couldn't stop Danzu from killing the old man. I couldn't save your father. And now I'm staring down the downfall of our home, and my godson being hunted by the worst kind of shinobi, and once again, despite all my efforts and posturing, the great Jiraiya of the Sannin has no idea how to save you. Let alone how to win. I'm strong enough to fight any pair they send after you by my reckoning. But what happens when they stop sending just 2? The fire spat, and near silence fell between them once more. Naruto's jaw hung loose as he peered at his sensei, who sat hunched over with his eyes locked onto the dancing flame. He'd never heard the man speak like this, never heard anything besides supreme confidence that, to be fair, had been earned through decades spent as one of the most powerful shinobi in the entire elemental nations. Naruto had grown so used to seeing him as some kind of unstoppable force of nature, he'd rarely taken the time to consider that Jiraiya himself may have been floundering. He'd had complete and utter faith in his sensei's actions, and so had come to just trust that Jiraiya had all the answers. He was one of the Sannin, a man who, had Sarutobi died naturally, would have been a shoo-in himself to be Hokage. He'd even dreamt of it in these last 2 years. Jiraiya, long after they'd taken back Konoha, passing the hat onto him. Itachi really had been right. Naruto had lost something since Konoha had fallen. Some spark. He'd grown immeasurably stronger in his time away from Konoha, and yet the him of 2 years ago would have never allowed things to get to this point. Would never have allowed someone else to bear the burden and stress of how to keep him safe alone, least of all a man he'd grown to consider family. But he only realized this because whatever it was that had been missing inside him, came back alive as he saw the hints of despair written across his teacher's face. Well, he said, allowing an easy smile to slip onto his face. It was a mask he wore as comfortably as breathing. In years past, he'd worn it to shield himself. It had been Jiraiya and his friends that had shown him he no longer needed to do that anymore, and he was incredibly grateful for that. Now, he found himself glad of the mask. It wasn't for protecting himself anymore, but instead, for protecting those around him. How about we work through my idea, and see if we can't find a way forward? Jiraiya looked up, and upon seeing Naruto's grin, found a tired smile of his own. I'm all ears, kid. Thanks. Now, I'm not stupid enough to think that we can win anything with no allies. You said we needed the backing of a hidden village to buy us time, and I don't necessarily think you're wrong. But it's not a village that we need, it's the people. Jiraiya frowned. I would agree, but our allies are all trapped within Konoha, or scattered to the winds. They're having to worry more about being poached for their bounties than coming to our aid. And even if we did gather a few of them together, where would we go? We're already pushing the hospitality of the Toads far enough by making this our home base. Convincing them to let non-summoners stay here is going to be nigh on impossible. One problem at a time, Naruto said, smile widening. Jiraiya was right, those were flaws, but they weren't as impossible to overcome as Jiraiya in his defeated state was thinking. Allies. Yes, all of our former Konoha allies are scattered, and we should absolutely be finding a way to gather them all together. But I was actually talking about other allies. Okay, Jiraiya said, the defeated expression slowly being eroded by curiosity. This I have to hear. What other allies? I hate to break it to you Gaki, but we don't actually have any of those. Sure, we don't yet. But what we do have is common enemies with a whole bunch of people across the elemental nations, and for Shinobi, that works just as well to start with. Jiraiya actually scoffed this time. And the other countries are just going to let us roam around poaching their Shinobi? Why do we care? Naruto asked, grin growing into a full-blown smirk, despite Jiraiya's sarcasm. If Danzu hadn't done what he did, Konoha Shinobi going and speaking to other villages' top-tier ninja and trying to poach them would have been grounds for war. Jiraiya's eyes widened. But we aren't Konoha Shinobi anymore. And let's face it, most of the other villages already have it out for both of us thanks to Minato. Danzu's coup means Konoha won't suffer the consequences of our actions. Having said that, I'm not sure how you're going to pull off convincing foreign shinobi to break all their oaths and become missing nin to join up with you. Naruto stroked his chin in mock thought. You're right. It's a damn shame there's not a group of A to S-class ninja with crazy powers that are treated abominably by their villages, who will also have a vested interest in defeating the Akatsuki. The Jinchuriki, Jiraiya whispered, now sitting fully upright, the gears in his mind racing. You want to fight the Akatsuki together as one with the other vessels. A Jinchuriki alliance. Yep. As a group, we're the ones that really lose if Akatsuki win. When push comes to shove, a lot of their villages will sell them out the minute it becomes too troublesome to protect them. We won't, Naruto said, wearing a grin he hadn't worn since his pranking days. That's insane. And stupid, Jiraiya said shortly, before a smile crept onto his face to match his students. And it sounds like the kind of thing only Jiraiya of the Sannin and his knucklehead student can pull off. I'm in. There was a rustle among the shadows of the trees then, and Naruto stiffened, only to see Fukasaku hop out from the underbrush. A truly interesting conversation all around, I have to say, brats. I think I have something that may help. Minato gave it to me, years ago, to pass on to you, Naruto. I was saving it as a present for when you fully master Senjutsu, but I no longer think that would be the wisest course of action. He withdrew a small scroll from his cloak, and held it up for them all to see. Jiraiya sucked in a sharp breath as Naruto looked carefully at the scroll's deep red paper with its forest green trim. His eyes, unavoidably, were drawn to the symbol upon the wax seal holding it together. A small symbol, but one that was absolutely unmistakable. After all, he still wore it on the arms and back of the shinobi gear he wore beneath his armor. That symbol. He began, and Fukasaku hummed in acknowledgement. Indeed. This, my boy, is your inheritance. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe for more content. Support the original author by clicking their profile link in the pinned comment of the first video of this series. They deserve the love. Want early access and exclusive content? Join my Patreon community, link below. Your support fuels these videos. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and I'll catch you in the next video. Stay entertained, stay safe.